I have never considered myself a rich woman, despite my bank account. For me, wealth has always been measured by other yardsticks: honesty, integrity, loyalty to one's principles. My late husband Hugh used to say that's why he and I found each other. We both valued what money couldn't buy. Sitting in my favorite chair by the window, I look at a photograph of Hugh and me standing in front of our first tiny jewelry store on Maple Street. 72 years of life has taught me many things, but the most important lesson I learned as a child is to never forget where you came from. The Martinsburg orphanage wasn't just cold because the heating was always broken. The indifference of the caretakers, who changed with frightening regularity, usually made our lives even more depressing than our worn-out clothes and meager lunches. I was 11 when I found a small pebble in the backyard, shimmering with all the colors of the rainbow. Ordinary quartz, as I learned later, but at the time it seemed like a real treasure. I kept it in a tin candy box with the other jewels: a colored glass, an old mother-of-pearl button, and a silver thimble given to me by Mrs. Tanner, who was the only teacher who ever took any interest in me. "You can see beauty in the simplest things, Clarice," she said to me one day. "It's a rare gift. Don't lose it." I didn't. Not even when, in my 20s, working as a cashier in a grocery store, I met Hugh Winslow, a young jeweler just starting out. He was 7 years older and already dreamed of having his own workshop. We fell in love, married 6 months later, and began building our little empire. Our first store on Maple Street was tiny, only 20 square meters, but for us it was a real palace. Hugh designed the jewelry, I handled the finances and customer relations. We worked 16 hours a day, but we never complained. Every new piece of jewelry, every satisfied customer who came back with friends, these were all small victories that added up to something bigger. When our Bridget was born, we were already owners of 3 Winslow jewelry stores in Martinsburg. I remember holding her tiny hand and dreaming that one day she would carry on our business. Hugh made her first piece of jewelry for her, a silver bracelet with a tiny amethyst, her horoscope stone. We put it on her wrist when she turned a year old. "It will grow with her," Hugh said, showing me the special mechanism that allowed the bracelet to lengthen. Like our empire. He was right about the empire. 10 years later, we opened our first store in the state capital, and by our 20th anniversary, Winslow Jewelry was known nationwide. But he was wrong about Bridget. She never wore that bracelet after 12 years. "It's old-fashioned, Mother," she said, shoving the jewelry into a dresser drawer. "And anyway, all my friends wear Tiffany's jewelry." It was the first time I'd noticed this trait in my daughter, the desire for flashiness, for status. Hugh just laughed and said it was a transitional age, that she'd outgrow it. But she didn't. Every year, the gulf between us grew deeper. At 15, Bridget began to feel self-conscious about our home, a spacious but not flashy mansion on the outskirts of town. "Why can't we move to Highland Hills?" she asked, rolling her eyes. "We have money." I'm ashamed to have friends over to our house. Hugh tried to explain to her that we didn't move, not because we didn't have money, but because we valued what we had made with our own hands. That true friends would not judge her by her neighborhood. She listened with a martyr's expression on her face. At 17, she threw a tantrum when we didn't buy her the brand of car she wanted. "You just want me to be as boring and unattractive as you are," she shouted at Hugh. "All normal parents want their children to have a better life than they do." Hugh and I exchanged glances then, and I could see the pain in his eyes. He was so proud of what we had achieved, starting from scratch. For him, the concept of a better life was never about more expensive things. University didn't change Bridget. She studied marketing and communications, but attended only those lectures she found useful for a social life. When Hugh died of a heart attack, she was 23. At the funeral, she cried beautifully and with restraint, as they teach in the movies, and the next day she asked me about the inheritance. I explained to her that I was now the sole owner of the company, although in fact it had long been run by our top managers. In recent years, Hugh spent more time creating unique jewelry, while I was involved in charity work. "So you're a billionaire?" Bridget asked with a look on her face as if she had just learned that I was an alien. "Money isn't the most important thing in life," I said. "It's how you use it and who you become in the process." "Oh God, Mom, don't start preaching again." She rolled her eyes. "I just want to know what I can count on." After Hugh died, Bridget didn't visit me as often. She'd taken a job at a big PR agency and, according to her social media feeds, had an active social life. Her visits usually consisted of short tea parties, during which she talked about important people she'd met and hinted that she needed money for a new apartment or closet. I never said no, but I also never gave as much as she wanted. I believed that being overly generous would not help her find herself and her path in life. And then she met Ezra Huntington. I didn't hear about it from her, but from a socialite in the local newspaper. A picture of a smiling daughter next to a tall blonde man at some charity event. The article introduced him as heir to the Huntington pharmaceutical empire. Bridget called me the next day, her voice ringing with excitement. "Did you see the paper? Did you see me with Ezra?" "I did," I said. "Can you tell me more about him?" "Oh, Mom, he's adorable." The Huntington family is practically the pharmaceutical aristocracy of Martinsburg. Their company makes drugs for the whole country. They have a house in the Highland Hills, a summer villa on the coast, and their own airplane. She said it in one breath. "We met at the opening of a new art gallery. Can you imagine? He collects modern art." I listened to her, trying to hear something about this man's personality rather than his condition, but in vain. "What kind of person is he?" I finally asked. "What do you mean?" Bridget didn't understand. "Is he kind? Intelligent? Caring? Do you share the same interests?" "Oh, Mother." She used that tone again, as if she were explaining something to a child. "Of course, he's very educated and sophisticated. We both love art and traveling. And he's so generous. He gave me sapphire earrings last week. From Tiffany's?" I couldn't resist a little irony. "No, from Cartier," she said seriously, not noticing the teasing. "Look, I'm calling because he invited me to dinner with his parents next weekend. That's a big step." I agreed with her, but anxiety settled inside me. I saw her eyes light up at the mention of the Huntington family's wealth, and I feared that she saw Ezra primarily as a lucrative match rather than a soulmate. Over the next few months, Bridget and Ezra appeared at every significant social event in Martinsburg. She never introduced me to him, always finding reasons. He had an important meeting, or they were flying out for the weekend, or he was working late. I didn't insist. Somehow it seemed to me that my daughter was ashamed of me, her mother, in front of this glossy heir. And then, one evening, as the autumn wind tossed yellow leaves through the windows of my house, a courier delivered an envelope. Heavy cream paper, gold embossing. Inside was an exquisite invitation to the wedding of Bridget Winslow and Ezra Huntington, scheduled for October 12th. I sat holding that envelope for a long time. My only daughter was getting married, and I would learn of it from a formal invitation, as if I were a distant relative or business associate. There was no call, no visit to share the joy, no traditional request for a blessing. When I finally called her, Bridget was busy and spoke curtly. "Yes, Mom, I'm sorry I didn't give you a personal notice. Things have gotten so hectic. Ezra's mom, Olivia, is handling the arrangements, and she's got everything under control. Did you get the invitation? Oh, that's great. The ceremony will be at the main cathedral and the reception at the Huntington estate. Bridget, I'd like to meet you and Ezra before the wedding," I said. "After all, I've never met your fiancé." There was a pause on the line. "You know, it's a busy time right now with so much to organize," she began evasively. "Maybe at the pre-wedding dinner? It's a week before the ceremony at the Azure restaurant. You'll be there, won't you?" "Of course I'll be there," I said. "I'm your mother, Bridget." Another pause. Mom, there's going to be a very sophisticated crowd. You know? Why don't you buy something new for the occasion?" I knew right away what she meant. My closet had always been practical and modest, even though I could afford any designer clothes. But for Bridget, it had always been a matter of shame. "I'll look appropriate," I replied dryly. "Thank you, Mom. I have to run, and I'll call you later." I hung up the phone and went to the window. Dusk was falling in Martinsburg, and the city lights were slowly coming on one by one, the wedding of my only daughter, the event I had dreamed of since I first held her in my arms. I imagined us picking out a dress together, discussing flowers and music, me handing her the Winslow family jewelry. But instead, I received a formal invitation and a request not to embarrass my daughter in front of her new in-laws. My heart clenched with pain and anxiety. What awaited me at this wedding? And what awaited my daughter in a marriage based on the pursuit of status and wealth rather than love? I didn't know the answers to these questions, but one thing was certain. I had to choose between indulging my daughter's illusions and staying true to myself and my values. And it wasn't going to be an easy choice. I always had a few things in my closet: a few practical suits for business meetings, a couple of dresses for special occasions, and comfortable casual clothes. Hugh always joked that I could buy up the entire fashion district, but instead, I've been wearing the same pearl set for 20 years. Why change something that works perfectly? I told him. These pearls saw the birth of our daughter and the opening of our first store in the capital. He is part of our history. Now, going through my modest closet in search of an outfit for the pre-wedding dinner, I remembered those conversations with quiet sadness. Hugh would be so upset to know that our daughter was ashamed of us and our lifestyle. I settled on a navy blue silk and wool suit. It was elegant but not flashy, and it went well with my favorite pearl necklace, the one Hugh had given me when Bridget was born. As I put it on in front of the mirror, I took stock of my reflection. A slender, gray-haired woman with a straight back and clear eyes stared back at me. The wrinkles near her eyes and mouth spoke of a life lived, but I'd never sought to hide them. Each one was earned through experience, and I wore them with dignity. At the last moment, I added a delicate aquamarine and diamond brooch, a piece of jewelry Hugh had created for our 30th wedding anniversary. I wanted a piece of him to be present at this important event. The Azure restaurant was located in the heart of Highland Hills, a neighborhood where the so-called elite of Martinsburg lived. As my car, not new, but a reliable sedan, drove up to the entrance, I noticed the young jack-of-all-trades wince slightly. The place was full of the latest luxury brands, and my modest car was clearly disturbing this expensive harmony. Bridget met me in the lobby of the restaurant. She looked stunning in a cream dress that emphasized her slim figure, but her smile faltered as she gave me a sizing glance. "Mom," she kissed the air near my cheek, "you did decide to wear this." It didn't sound like a question, but a statement of disappointing fact. "I told you I was going to look appropriate," I replied calmly. "This outfit was appropriate for dinner." Bridget sighed, but she didn't argue. "Come on, everyone's already in the private room. Please," she lowered her voice. "Try not to talk about your childhood in the orphanage. And maybe don't mention that our first store was the size of a pantry. Okay?" I looked her in the eye. "Are you ashamed of my past, Bridget?" "No, of course not." She looked around nervously. "It's just, the Huntingtons are very proud of their family history. Their business has been around for 4 generations. I just don't want there to be any, misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding about what? That I built a successful business from scratch with no connections and no money?" My voice remained calm, but inside I was beginning to resent it. "Mom, please!" Bridget was literally begging. "It's a big night tonight. I want everything to go perfectly." I took a deep breath and nodded. After all, it was her night, her wedding, her life. Who was I to ruin it? The private room of the restaurant was decorated with impeccable taste. Cream tablecloths, crystal glasses, bouquets of white roses. About 20 people were already seated at the large oval table, family and close friends of the bride and groom. I immediately singled out the Huntingtons. They sat at the head of the table, radiating that special smugness that only people who have never known real hardship can have. Olivia Huntington, Ezra's mother, was a tall, elegant woman with perfectly styled ash hair and a keen gaze in her gray eyes. Her husband, Warren, looked like a typical successful businessman, trim, with early gray on his temples and a commanding expression. "There's Bridget's mom," Olivia exclaimed as we approached. "At last we meet. I've heard so much about you." Her tone was impeccably polite, but her eyes quickly recognized my outfit and flashed something akin to contempt. "Likewise, Mrs. Huntington," I replied, shaking her cool hand. "Bridget has told me a great deal about you." "Oh, please, call me Olivia," she said with a smile that didn't affect her eyes. "We're almost related now, aren't we? Have a seat." I noticed that my seat was almost at the end of the table, far from the center where the newlyweds and the groom's parents sat. Bridget quickly introduced me to the rest of the guests, but I could see she was anxious to get back to Ezra and his parents. Ezra Huntington appeared to be a tall young man with a well-groomed appearance and a disposable smile. He stood up when we were introduced and shook my hand. Mrs. Winslow, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. Bridget has told me so much about you. She has? I couldn't contain my surprise. I, on the other hand, have not learned much about you. Something flickered in his eyes, maybe confusion or embarrassment. Well, we'll have plenty of time to get to know each other, he said with a knowing smile, and returned to his conversation with Warren. Dinner was exquisite, as one might expect. 6 changes of dishes, each a small masterpiece of culinary art. At the table, there were conversations about the latest contemporary art exhibits, the polo tournament in a neighboring state, and how hard it was to find a good maid these days. I was mostly silent, watching my daughter. Bridget glowed as she sat next to Ezra, laughing at all of Olivia's jokes and making small talk with the confidence of someone who'd spent a lifetime in such circles. I didn't recognize my daughter. Or maybe I'd never really known her. "What do you do, Clarice?" Olivia asked suddenly as dessert was served. All conversation at the table fell silent as if on cue. Did Bridget mention something about jewelry making? I felt Bridget tense. She gave me a warning look. "Yes, I have a small jewelry business," I answered modestly. "My late husband and I started it years ago." "How nice," Olivia smiled. "A small family store? What neighborhood is it in?" "Our first store was on Maple Street," I said, deliberately failing to mention that Winslow Jewelry was now a 32-store chain and a billion-dollar brand. "We create handmade jewelry." "Fascinating." Olivia shifted her gaze to my pearls. "Do you make your own jewelry?" "A lot of it is made by my husband." I touched the pearls around my neck. "He gave me this set when Bridget was born." "How touching," Warren said with a touch of irony. "Family values are wonderful. We in the Huntington family also value tradition. Our company has been in the family for 4 generations." "That's impressive," I replied sincerely. "It must be hard to keep a family business going in today's world." "Oh, we just know how to adapt and grow," Warren remarked with a smug smile. "The last quarter was a record quarter for profits. We just acquired another pharmaceutical company on the West Coast. Ezra's leading that line of business." "Yes, I hear your company is very successful," I said. "Ezra, do you like working in the family business?" Ezra straightened up, clearly flattered by the attention. "Of course. I've known since I was a kid that I would carry on my father's work. I have an MBA from Harvard and experience in several leading corporations, but the family business is a special responsibility and privilege. And tremendous opportunity," Bridget added, looking at him with adoration. Ezra had just taken the lead on a new project to develop innovative drugs. I noticed her casually touching the diamond bracelet on her wrist, clearly a recent gift. "And you, Clarice, do you ever plan to expand your business?" "Business?" Warren asked. "I'm happy with the way it is at the moment," I replied diplomatically. Bridget hurriedly turned the conversation to the wedding preparations. I saw her exchange a relieved look with Olivia, as if they'd overcome a challenge together. After dessert, the guests began to move to the lounge area for cocktails. I took a moment to approach Ezra. "I'd like to get to know you better, Ezra," I said bluntly. "You are going to be the husband of my only daughter, after all." He laughed, showing perfect white teeth. "Of course, Mrs. Winslow. I understand your anxiety. It must be strange to put your daughter in the hands of a near stranger." "Strange is not quite the word," I answered. "It's more alarming. I want to make sure you make her happy." "Oh, I promise she'll have the best of everything," he smiled with a slight condescension. "We're already looking at a house in Highland Hills. Bridget will have her own stylist, housekeeper, gardener, whatever she wants." "What about love, understanding, support?" I asked quietly. Ezra gave me a surprised look, as if he hadn't expected me to be so blunt. "Of course I love Bridget. She's a wonderful woman, and we understand each other perfectly." "I'm glad to hear that," I nodded. "You know, Ezra, my daughter grew up in a home where honesty, hard work, and integrity were the most important values. I hope you share those values." "Of course." He frowned slightly. "The Huntingtons are a respected family with an impeccable reputation. We've always held ourselves to high standards in everything we do." Bridget came over to us, her smile seeming too strained. "Mom, I see you and Ezra are already talking. I hope you're not discussing my childhood mischief." "No, just getting to know each other." Ezra replied, putting his arm around her waist. Your mom is worried about your future. It's only natural. Oh, Mom's always worried. Bridget laughed a little too loudly. Ezra, your father's looking for you. Something about a deal with Japan. When Ezra stepped away, Bridget turned to me, her voice sounding strained. What did you tell him? Just what any mother would tell her future son-in-law, I said calmly. That I want you to be happy. I'll be happy if you stay out of it. She cut me off. Ezra is the perfect match. His family opens the door for me to Martinsburg's high society. What about love? I asked quietly. Love, she rolled her eyes. Mom, I'm 28 years old. It's time to be practical. I respect Ezra, and he respects me. We're going to have a beautiful family and a perfect life. At that moment, Olivia came up to us with a glass of champagne in her hand. What are you girls whispering about? Talking about wedding plans, I hope? I was just about to tell my mom about them, Bridget said. Mom, you have no idea what an amazing ceremony Olivia organized. I spent the next half hour listening to the floral arrangements of rare orchids that would be flown in from Thailand, the string quartet from the Philharmonic, the 3 Michelin-starred chef who had been invited to create the wedding menu, and the custom-made gown from a famous designer in Paris. And of course, we will prepare a personalized gift for each guest, a set of luxury perfume and accessories packed in engraved silver boxes, Olivia proudly announced. We believe that the wedding of our only son should be the event of the year at Martinsburg. That's impressive, was all I could say. It must cost a fortune to organize such an event. Oh, don't worry about it, Olivia said. For our son's only wedding, we don't count the expense. Besides, traditionally, the bride's family was the primary expense. I felt Bridget tense beside me. Of course, I said discreetly. Although these days many couples prefer to split the expenses equally. Maybe in some circles, Olivia pursed her lips. But in our society, we have certain traditions. Bridget understands that, don't you, dear? My daughter nodded with a fake smile. Of course, Olivia. Don't worry, we've talked it over. I looked at Bridget with surprise. We hadn't discussed anything. She hadn't even mentioned that I was expected to pay for this extravagant event. But something in the expression on her face, a mixture of pleading and fear, stopped me from commenting. Bridget, honey, Olivia touched her arm gently. Tell your mom about the honeymoon. Ezra's preparing such a surprise. We're going on a trip around the world. First the Maldives, then Japan, then Italy and France. A whole month. Sounds magical, I said. I hope you'll take a vacation with your agency. Bridget exchanged a quick glance with Olivia. Actually, I'm quitting my job. Olivia doesn't think it's appropriate for Ezra's wife to work at a PR agency. I'll have a lot of responsibilities as Mrs. Huntington. Charity events, business dinners, social engagements. I looked at my daughter, not recognizing her. Bridget, who had always prided herself on her independence, was now willing to give up her career for the status of Mrs. Huntington. Are you sure that's what you want? I asked quietly. Absolutely, she replied with an enthusiasm that seemed exaggerated to me. This is a new chapter of my life. Later, as the evening drew to a close, Bridget took me aside. Mom, about the wedding expenses. She began hesitantly. Yes, I've noticed that Olivia thinks it's my responsibility, I said. You could have given me more notice, though. I'm sorry I wanted to, but things move so fast. She lowered her eyes. The wedding coordinator will send you an estimate the other day. But don't worry. I've done my best to curb Olivia's appetite. How much is this going to cost me? I asked her bluntly. Bridget gave me a figure that took my breath away. $650,000 for one day, for one single day of the illusion of high society. That's a lot of money, I said, trying to stay calm. I know. Bridget looked guilty, but only slightly. But it's my wedding, Mom. A once-in-a-lifetime wedding. And you can afford it, can't you? In her eyes, I saw a strange mixture of emotions, pleading, shame, but also some calculation. She knew I'd never denied her the truly important things, and she was taking advantage of that. Yes, I can, I answered with restraint. But this isn't about whether I can afford it, Bridget. It's about the fact that you didn't even consult me. You didn't ask my opinion. You just faced the fact. Oh, Mom, she sighed with slight irritation. If I'd asked, you'd have started talking about prudence and spending, but this is a wedding. It has to be special. A wedding isn't just a show for the guests, I pointed out. It's the beginning of a life together, and how you start it is how you'll continue it. Please don't start lecturing me now. Bridget looked around to see if anyone could hear us. I know how you feel about all this, but this is important to me. I want to impress Ezra's family. I want to be worthy of their circle. In that moment, I realized that my daughter was completely immersed in the illusion of belonging to the elite. She was willing to pay any price, financial, emotional, moral, to be accepted into this glossy world of ostentatious wealth. And what hurt me most of all was that the price included giving up her own mother, her roots, everything Hugh and I had tried to teach her. I'll wire the money to the wedding coordinator's account, I finally said. But Bridget, please think about what's really important in life. Money won't make you happy if you don't have people who truly love you. I'll have Ezra, she said with a confidence that seemed fake to me. And then I have you, Mom. I know you'll always be there for me. I hugged her, feeling the anxiety growing inside. Yes, I had always supported my daughter, but right now I wasn't sure if supporting this fake fairy tale was really helping. As I left the restaurant, I looked back at Bridget, who stood surrounded by the Huntington family, smiling, beautiful, but somehow fake, like an expensive porcelain doll displayed on a shelf for all to admire. And I wondered if Ezra saw her as a real person with her own dreams and weaknesses, or just another trophy in his collection. The morning of October 12th was surprisingly clear for mid-autumn. Sunlight was streaming through the curtains when I opened my eyes. Today, my only daughter was getting married. The day, which was supposed to be one of the happiest of my life, began with a heaviness in my chest and a vague sense of foreboding. In the 2 weeks since the pre-wedding dinner, Bridget had not called me once. I did receive an email from the wedding coordinator with a detailed cost estimate and an account number to transfer the money to. I deposited the required amount, though every digit in that astronomical sum caused me to protest internally. $650,000. That money could have been used to build a homeless shelter or fund the education of dozens of talented children from disadvantaged backgrounds. Instead, it went to orchids from Thailand and caviar for pampered guests. For the wedding, I chose an elegant ivory suit, expensive but not flashy. I complimented it with a pearl necklace and a small brooch with diamonds in the shape of a flower, a piece of jewelry that Hugh created for Bridget's birth. I may not have been up to the Huntington family's standards of glamour, but I was true to myself and my style. St. Michael's Cathedral in downtown Martinsburg was decorated as lavishly as if it were preparing for a royal wedding. White flowers cascaded down the columns, hundreds of candles created a soft glow, and stained glass windows cast multicolored spots on the marble floor. Arriving an hour before the ceremony began, I saw waiters, photographers, and coordinators with clipboards fidgeting with last-minute orders. I was intercepted by a young man with a headset in his ear. "Are you a guest of the bride or the groom?" he asked in a businesslike manner. "I am the mother of the bride," I replied. He checked the list on his clipboard. "Mrs. Winslow, Mrs. Winslow? Let me escort you to the side aisle where the next of kin gather." About 10 people were gathered in the small room off the main hall, the Huntington family, and a few of their close friends. Bridget was not there. She was apparently in the special bridal room. Why, Olivia Huntington, dressed in a defiantly expensive pastel blue gown, greeted me with a nod. "Oh, Clarice, there you are. Lovely weather for a wedding, isn't it?" "Yes, it's a beautiful day," I agreed. "Can I see Bridget before the ceremony?" Olivia frowned slightly. "I'm afraid this isn't a good time. The stylist is finishing her hair, and then the photo shoot will start right away. You know how important it is. Everything has to be perfect." "Of course," I said, suppressing my disappointment. Even on a day like this, I couldn't be alone with my daughter, tell her how beautiful she was, and wish her happiness. The ceremony started at 2 o'clock sharp. I sat in the front row, as a mother of the bride should, but I felt like a stranger. There was an empty seat next to me, the seat where Hugh should have been sitting. I wished he were here now, holding my hand and whispering his wise comments. When the ceremonial music played and the doors swung open, my breath caught. Bridget was dazzling. Her dress, a masterpiece of silk and lace, gently contoured her figure and ended in a long train. Her hair was gathered into an elaborate coiffure decorated with fresh flowers and tiny diamonds. She walked slowly and majestically, as befitted a bride, with a bouquet of white roses in her hands. As she passed me, Bridget didn't even glance in my direction. Her eyes were fixed only on Ezra, who was waiting for her at the altar with the smug smile of a winner. The ceremony was beautiful but cold. The traditional vows, the exchange of rings, the kiss to the applause of the guests. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was attending a carefully choreographed performance where every gesture was designed to impress the audience. After the ceremony, guests moved to the Huntington estate to continue the celebration. The vast gardens were transformed. White silk tents, floral arches, tables covered with white tablecloths and set with china and crystal. A string quartet played. Waiters served champagne and canapes. I stood to the side, watching Bridget and Ezra accept congratulations. They looked flawless, the perfect couple from the cover of a glossy magazine. But there was something unnatural about the way they smiled, the way they held hands, as if they were mannequins instead of living people. An older woman with a friendly face approached me. "What a lovely wedding, isn't it? I'm Eleanor, Ezra's maternal aunt. And you must be Bridget's mom." "Yes, I'm Clarice Winslow," I answered, glad to have someone to talk to. "You must be very proud of your daughter, such a beautiful bride. And what a union! The Huntingtons are the cream of Martinsburg society." I was about to reply that I was proud of Bridget, not because of her marriage, but because of her intelligence and talents. But at that moment, Bridget came up to us, accompanied by a middle-aged couple. "Ah, there you are," she said, turning to me with a polite smile. "Let me introduce you to Richard and Lorraine Pembroke, longtime business associates of the Huntington family." I expected her to introduce me as her mother, but Bridget continued. "This is Clarice, a longtime family friend." I froze, not believing my ears. A longtime family friend, not a mother, just an acquaintance? "Nice to meet you," I mumbled, feeling the color flood my face. "Likewise," Richard replied, eyeing me with an appraising gaze. "How long have you known Bridget?" "Ever since she was born," I answered with restraint. "I've been present at every important moment of her life." Bridget tensed visibly. "Clarice is just kidding. She's known me since I was a teenager. Her husband was a consultant to my father on some business matters." I couldn't believe my ears. My daughter wasn't just presenting me as an outsider. She was actually denying our connection by making up some ridiculous story. "In fact," I said, looking straight into Richard and Lorraine's eyes, I think we're being called for a group photo." Bridget quickly interrupted me. "If you'll excuse me." She led the Pembroke couple away, throwing me a warning glance over her shoulder. I stood alone, stunned and hurt to the core. My own daughter had disowned me for the sake of conforming to her new family's expectations. Over the next hour, the situation only worsened. I noticed that Bridget systematically avoided me, and if we did speak, she never called me mom or mentioned our kinship. To all the guests, I was just an old family acquaintance, perhaps a former neighbor or distant relative who had been invited as a courtesy. I moved from group to group, trying to find my place in this celebration of life, but everywhere I felt superfluous. Several times I noticed mocking looks and whispers behind my back. Once I overheard a young woman say to her companion, "Who is that strange old woman in the old-fashioned suit? She looks like a retired librarian." Her companion laughed. "I have no idea. Probably some distant relative of a provincial bride. I heard her family was quite simple before she got married." I kept my dignity, but every such remark hit the mark. Not because I was considered poor or simple. I was never ashamed of my roots. It was because my own daughter was so ashamed of them that she chose to disown her mother. The peak of humiliation came when I happened to be near a group with Olivia Huntington standing in the center. She hadn't noticed me behind a tall floral arrangement and was ranting, "So funny. Can you believe she thought she could show up in that pearl garniture from the last century for the wedding of the year?" I told her, of course, that it was lovely, but my goodness, what a redneck. No wonder Bridget prefers not to spread the word about her family. There was laughter, and then a voice I recognized as the mother of one of the bridesmaids. "Is it true she keeps some kind of jewelry shop? That's nice. It's almost like a Cinderella story." "Only Cinderella was young and pretty," Olivia countered, causing another burst of laughter. This is more of a wicked stepmother story. Thank God Ezra's such a gentleman. A lot of people in his position would think twice before getting involved with a girl from such a dysfunctional family. I stepped back, nausea rising in my throat. Dysfunctional family? An evil stepmother? I gave Bridget everything: love, time, money. And this is how she repaid me: by letting these pompous snobs mock her mother, the woman who built an empire from scratch, who taught her everything she knows. I found a quiet corner of the garden and sat on a bench, trying to gather my thoughts. Pulling out my phone to distract myself, I saw a new email from the wedding coordinator. I opened it and froze. "Dear Mrs. Winslow," the email read, "sending you the final invoice for your wedding expenses. Due to some recent changes and additions," list attached, "the final amount was $650,000. Bridget has informed me that you are covering all expenses, so please transfer the amount to the account below within 3 business days. Sincerely, Veronica Miles, wedding coordinator." I went through the list of changes and additions: additional floral arrangements, increasing the number of guests by 50, changing the champagne to a more expensive brand, renting vintage cars to transport guests. Every line screamed of wanton wastefulness. But that's not what struck me the most. It was that Bridget, my own daughter, who now pretended to barely know me, expected me to pay for all this splendor. She was ashamed of me enough to imagine me an outsider, but not enough to refuse my money. At that moment, something broke inside me. All the pain, all the frustration, all the resentment I'd been holding back for my daughter's sake burst out. Hugh had always said I was too soft on Bridget, that I indulged her whims. He was right. It was time to put an end to it. I stood up and walked with a determined step back toward the reception tents. The musicians had just taken a break, and the host announced that the toasts were about to begin. Perfect timing. I walked over to the small stage where the microphone stood and climbed the steps. The host looked at me with surprise. "Can I help you?" "I'd like to say a few words," I answered calmly. "And you?" He checked the list on his clipboard. "I'm the mother of the bride," I said firmly. He nodded, though there was a look of puzzlement in his eyes. "Of course, Mrs. Winslow," after a toast from the groom's father. "No," I shook my head. "Now." And before he could object, I took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," my voice, amplified by the speakers, echoed through the garden. "May I have your attention, please?" The guests turned with curiosity. I saw Bridget freeze with a glass of champagne in her hand, her eyes widening in horror. Ezra beside her looked puzzled. Olivia Huntington hurriedly whispered something to her husband. "For those who don't know me," I continued, "I'm Clarice Winslow, mother of the bride." I paused, letting that information settle in. "Some of you may have heard that I own a little jewelry shop." I smiled, seeing some of the guests glance over in confusion. "That's not exactly true. I own Winslow Jewelry, a chain of 32 boutiques across the country, with annual sales of $120 million. A whisper ran through the crowd. Olivia's face turned pale. "My late husband Hugh and I started from scratch. We had no connections, no inheritance, not even a roof over our heads. I grew up in an orphanage. But we had a dream and a willingness to work day and night to realize it. Today, Winslow Jewelry is a brand known for its quality and unique designs. Our jewelry is worn by celebrities and even royalty." I paused for a moment. "I guess that makes me more than just an old family acquaintance, doesn't it, Bridget?" My daughter stood as if thunderstruck. Ezra's face expressed a mixture of shock and sudden interest, financial, not human. "You know what always struck me as odd?" I continued. "The way people judge others by their clothes, their manners, their trappings. I could wear jewelry worth millions, live in a mansion, and drive a luxury car. But I chose modesty because I know the true value of money and labor. I chose to invest in charity and in my daughter's future." I looked directly at Bridget. My daughter, who today chose to disown me for the sake of impressing people who think wealth is the only measure of human worth. There was a sepulchral silence in the garden. Even the birds seemed to have fallen silent. "I got the final bill for this wedding today." I lifted the phone, showing the letter. $650,000. A sum that could have been used to build a homeless shelter or fund the education of dozens of talented children. And the best part is that my daughter, who today pretended to barely know me, expects me to pay for the whole show. I took a deep breath. Well, I have an announcement. I will indeed pay for this wedding. The bills have to be paid. But this is the last money Bridget will get from me. I made the decision today to change my will. The bulk of my estate will go to create a fund to help orphans and underprivileged families. Bridget would get only our first store on Maple Street, the same store that Hugh and I had started, and which she had always considered unworthy of mention. I saw Olivia's face contort with rage, Ezra lean over and whisper something fiercely to Bridget, the guests looking around in shock. Thank you for your attention, I finished. And have a good night, everyone. There was a deafening silence in the garden as I handed the microphone back to the host and walked off the stage. Hundreds of eyes were watching me, some with shock, some with sudden interest, others with ill-concealed gloating. The wedding of the year had just turned into the scandal of the year. The first to come to his senses was Warren Huntington. He stepped forward, putting a fake smile on his face. Well, ladies and gentlemen, a little surprise from the mother of the bride. He tried to turn it into a joke. And now let's continue our celebration. Music! The orchestra obediently played something bravura, but the atmosphere was already hopelessly spoiled. The guests gathered in groups, whispering and casting curious glances in my direction and at the newlyweds. Some of them did not even try to hide their pleasure at the unfolding drama. Martinsburg's high society always liked other people's downs more than their own ups. I hadn't taken 10 steps before Bridget appeared in front of me. Her face was blotchy red, her eyes were lightning fast, and her hands were clenched into fists so tight her knuckles were white. "How could you?" she hissed. "How could you humiliate me like that on the most important day of my life?" "Humiliate you?" I stared at her in bewilderment. "Bridget, you introduced me to strangers as an old acquaintance. You were ashamed of your own mother. You humiliated me. I just didn't want people to know." She hesitated. "Knew what? That your mom grew up in an orphanage? That we started with a little store, not an inheritance? Or maybe you didn't want them to know that there was nothing behind all that tinsel but your desire to appear to be something you're not? You've ruined everything!" Her voice shook with rage. "You ruined my wedding! You ruined my relationship with Ezra! You ruined my whole life! How am I supposed to look people in the eye now?" "With dignity and honesty," I answered calmly. "Like I've taught you all your life." "Taught?" Bridget laughed bitterly. "You taught me to be a laughingstock. Look how modest I am, how frugal. No glitz, no glamour, no swagger. Just work, work, work. And yet I've been sitting on billions and living like an old miser." "I've lived by my values, Bridget. And I never hid our financial situation from you. You knew about the company, about its value. You just chose to ignore it because you were ashamed of the source of our wealth. You see, the Huntington family has owned a pharmaceutical empire for 4 generations, and we're the upstarts who created it all on our own. How unseemly." Bridget opened her mouth to reply, but at that moment Ezra came up to us. His handsome face was contorted with rage, but he was still trying to maintain some semblance of control. "What the hell is going on here?" He gritted his teeth, turning to Bridget. "You said your mother owned some jewelry store, and now it turns out she's a billionaire. Ezra, darling, I can explain." Bridget instantly changed from anger to pleading. I just didn't want it to distract attention from us." "You didn't want it to be a distraction?" Ezra snorted contemptuously. "Or didn't want me to know? God, Bridget, we could have had a wedding 3 times as lavish. We could have flown on a private jet for the honeymoon. We could have gotten a mansion twice the size of the one I had in mind. And you hid from me that your mother is richer than my family." I watched the scene with growing disgust. Ezra didn't even try to hide his disappointment at not being able to use my money. He didn't care about the deception. He cared about the lost profits. "Look, Ezra," I interjected, "if you love my daughter, what does it matter if I'm rich or poor? Shouldn't Bridget be the center of your attention?" He looked at me as if I had said something incredibly stupid. "Of course I love Bridget. But marriage isn't just about love, Mrs. Winslow. It's about status and finances and connections. My family expected me to make a favorable match." He threw Bridget a look of reproach at her. And I thought I had. Bridget is so elegant, so suited to the role of Mrs. Huntington. Who would have thought she was hiding such a trump card? Bridget looked like she was about to cry. Ezra, please, let's not make a scene. The guests are watching. I don't care about the guests, he shouted. You tricked me, Bridget. And what's worse, you let your mother make that ridiculous gesture of changing your will at our wedding. Do you have any idea what that means? It means we won't get a dime of her estate. At that moment, Olivia and Warren approached us. Olivia's face was a mask of polite interest, but her eyes were coldly assessing the situation. Clarice, dear, what an unexpected turn, she said with false cordiality. Why didn't you tell us about your situation at the pre-wedding dinner? No one asked, I answered dryly. Besides, you were so busy discussing your family history and social standing that I didn't want to interrupt. Warren coughed. Look, we may have started off on the wrong foot, but now is not the time for disagreement. Our kids just got married. We're a family now. Why don't we discuss all this in a quieter setting? Say, over dinner next week. I looked at him carefully. Now that they'd learned of my condition, the Huntingtons were suddenly interested in family ties. How predictable. I'm afraid I'm on a tight schedule, I replied. Besides, I've already said everything I wanted to say. Mom. Bridget grabbed my hand. You can't just leave like this. We need to talk about this inheritance decision of yours. Decision about the inheritance. There's nothing to talk about, Bridget. The decision's been made. But that's ridiculous, Ezra intervened. You can't disinherit your only daughter over one little misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? I raised an eyebrow. You consider publicly disowning her mother a small misunderstanding, Ezra? That's an interesting value scale you've got there. Come on, Clarice. Olivia stepped in, addressing me by my first name for the first time without a hint of condescension. Bridget was just nervous. A wedding is so stressful for a young girl. We all say and do things we regret. Oh, I don't think Bridget regretted her behavior until I took the microphone, I remarked. In fact, she seemed quite content to introduce me as an outsider. Bridget looked cornered. Mom, I know what I did was wrong. But please, let's not make any rash decisions. You're not seriously considering giving your entire fortune to charity, are you? Absolutely. I looked her straight in the eye. And it's not a hasty decision, Bridget. I've been thinking about it for a long time. Today's events were just the final straw. But it's not fair, she almost shouted. It's my inheritance. You can't just give it to strangers. I earned this money with my own labor, I answered calmly, and I have every right to dispose of it as I see fit. You get the store on Maple Street, the place where it all began. If you are truly your parents' daughter, you can build your own empire on that foundation, like your father and I once did. Ezra let out a scornful chuckle. A little store in the old part of town? Are you kidding me? What are we going to do with it? Not we, Bridget, I corrected him. It's her inheritance, not yours. We're husband and wife. Ezra was outraged. We have the same interests. We do? I looked at him questioningly. It seemed to me that you were only interested in the money you were hoping to make by marrying Bridget. Ezra's face darkened with anger. How dare you? I am the Huntington heir. I don't want your money. But you were disappointed to find out you weren't going to get it, I said. That's a strange reaction for a man who doesn't need it. Warren put his hand on his son's shoulder, trying to reassure him. Ezra, hold it together. Don't forget that there are guests around. He turned to me. Clarice, let's discuss this in a quieter setting. I'm sure we can find a compromise that we can all agree on. No compromise, I said firmly. My decision is final. Olivia changed her tactic. Clarice, sweetheart, I understand that you're upset. It must have been so painful when Bridget, but she's your daughter. You can't really want to disinherit her, can you? I'm not disinheriting her, I argued. I'm giving her what's really valuable, a chance to create something worthwhile for herself. If that's what she wants, of course. Bridget looked at me with a mixture of despair and rage. You're doing this out of spite. You've always been like this, controlling, demanding, always dissatisfied. Nothing was ever good enough for you. You wanted me to be a copy of you, but I'm not you, Mom. I want to live my own life. And what does your life consist of, Bridget? I asked quietly. Is it to marry a rich man and be a piece of jewelry on his arm? Is it to spend money on meaningless luxuries and social events? Is this the life you dreamed of? Yes, she shouted. That's exactly what it is. A life of beauty, luxury, respect. Not a life of looking back on the past and living more modestly than you can afford. In that case, I said sadly, we really are too different. And maybe my decision is the best for both of us. I saw her face change as she realized that I wasn't kidding or bluffing, that I really intend to exclude her from the will, leaving only a token inheritance. Panic flashed in her eyes. Mom, please. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Don't do this. I apologize for everything. I was just confused. I wanted to impress the people who were laughing behind your back. I finished for her. People who only value the trappings of success. Those aren't the people, Bridget, whose opinion should mean anything. Ezra couldn't take it anymore. Enough of this nonsense. If you think you can humiliate the Huntington family like this, you are sorely mistaken. Our lawyers will contact yours. We will contest any changes to the will. On what grounds? I asked calmly. I am of sound mind and good judgment. I don't have any mental illness, and I have every right to dispose of my property as I see fit. We'll find a way. Ezra continued to rage. Bridget is your only heir. It's unnatural to disinherit your own child. Actually, I pointed out, many wealthy people now leave their children only a small portion of their fortune, so as not to deprive them of the motivation to achieve. Bill Gates, Warren Buffett. The list goes on. Warren tried to lighten the mood again. Look, let's not spoil the wedding day with this kind of talk. The guests are waiting for the newlyweds to cut the cake and open the dancing part of the evening. We can come back to this conversation later, in a more appropriate setting. I nodded. You're right, Warren. There's no need to spoil the party any more than it's already spoiled. I'd better be going. My presence here is no longer required. Mom! Bridget grabbed my arm. You can't just leave. What will people say? What will they say if I stay? I asked. That an elderly billionaire mom is trying to steal attention from her daughter on her wedding day? No, Bridget. I'd rather leave. Enjoy your celebration. I turned to leave, but Olivia blocked my path. Clarice, dear, she smiled, but her eyes remained cold. I hope you realize that your démarche has created a certain awkwardness, but we're willing to put it behind us. We are family now, after all. She lowered her voice. And we have common interests. Combining our businesses could be mutually beneficial. Really, Olivia? I couldn't hide my amazement. Half an hour ago, you were calling me a redneck behind my back. And now you're talking about merging businesses? How quickly your priorities change when you find out that the redneck is richer than you. Olivia blushed, but continued to insist. It was just a misunderstanding. I didn't mean it at all. You meant exactly what you said, I interrupted her. And you know what? I'm not mad at you. You just showed your true colors. And so did your son. And so did my daughter. And for that, I should be grateful. I walked around her and headed out of the garden. Mom, please don't leave like that. We have to talk. Not now, Bridget, I said without turning around. Now you must go back to your guests and your husband. You're getting married, remember? To hell with the wedding. There was desperation in her voice. You can't just turn my whole life upside down and walk away. I stopped and turned to her. I'm not the one who turned your life upside down, Bridget. It was your own decisions and choices that brought you here. I only showed you the reality you didn't want to see. What reality? That my own mother hates me enough to take everything away from me? No, I shook my head. The reality that your husband married you for money. A reality where your new family only respects wealth and status. A reality in which you yourself are willing to disown your own mother for the sake of appearing to be something you're not. Bridget stiffened, the words finally breaking through her defenses. You're wrong about Ezra. He loves me. Doesn't he? I smiled sadly. Then why was he so upset when he found out he wasn't getting my money? I could see the doubt in her eyes, but she quickly suppressed it. It's just a shock. He didn't expect it. No one did, I agreed. But people's reactions to the unexpected say a lot about their true nature. I turned and continued toward the exit. Behind me, I could hear Ezra calling for Bridget to return to the guests. His voice sounded harsh and demanding. As I got into the car, I felt a strange mix of emotions, the devastation of finally breaking up with my daughter, the bitterness of realizing how little I meant to her, but also a kind of release. All my life I had tried to be a good mother, to protect Bridget, to provide her with everything she needed. But the more I gave, the more she demanded, and the less she appreciated. Today, I finally let her go. Let her live with the consequences of her decisions. It was painful, very painful. But for the first time in years, I felt like I had done the right thing. Not as a mother trying to protect her child from the world, but as a person who respected other people's choices and her own boundaries. As I left Huntington Manor, I took one last look at the luxurious tents, at the guests in expensive clothes, at all the tinsel designed to create the illusion of a perfect life. And I realized I didn't envy Bridget, because behind all that pretty picture, she was going to live with a man who saw in her only a path to wealth, and with a new family, for whom she was only a means of raising her social status. And I was coming home, to a house full of memories of true love, of Hugh, of years of labor and small joys together, of a life lived with dignity and honesty. And if the price for that is the loss of a daughter who never truly valued those principles, perhaps that price isn't so high. My house greeted me with its familiar silence. I took off my shoes in the hallway, hung my suit in the closet, and changed into a soft house robe. My hands trembled slightly. The adrenaline that had kept me energized at the wedding was gradually receding, leaving behind fatigue and a pinched emptiness. I made myself a cup of tea and sat down in my favorite chair by the window, the same one where Hugh had once sat, reading the newspaper in the evening. Through the window, I could see the lights of evening Martinsburg, twinkling peacefully in the fading twilight. An ordinary, peaceful picture, so incompatible with the drama that had played out a few hours before. "What would you say, Hugh?" I whispered to the emptiness of the room. Had I done the right thing? There was no answer, of course, but I could almost physically feel that he would approve of my decision. Hugh had always been a straightforward man who didn't tolerate falsity or pretense. "Be honest with yourself and others," he used to say. "Life is too short for games and masks." The phone that lay on the table vibrated. The number was unfamiliar. I decided to answer it. Perhaps it was Bridget calling from someone else's phone. "Hello? Clarice! Darling!" It was a sweet, luscious woman's voice. "It's Veronica Page. I met her at the Heritage Society fundraiser last year. Do you remember me?" I didn't. I attended dozens of fundraisers every year, but I always kept a low profile, avoiding the limelight. "I apologize, but..." "Never mind, sweetheart. I'm calling to personally invite you to our society's annual ball. This year we're planning a big event, and of course we'd love your support." She meant money. Not my presence, not my participation in the society, but purely financial support. "I'm afraid I'll be busy," I replied dryly. "But thank you for the invitation." "Oh, what a pity. Perhaps you could just make a donation then. We could mention Winslow Jewelry as one of the sponsors." "I'll contact you if I decide to participate," I said, and hung up. Not 5 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, it was Eleanor Fitzgerald, the wife of the mayor of Martinsburg, with whom I had barely spoken to her at some official reception 3 years ago. "Clarice, darling, I'm so glad I finally got you on the phone," she chirped. "Richard and I have been wanting to invite you to dinner for ages. You're such a mysterious figure in this town." "Really?" I was surprised. "And I thought I was just an ordinary person." "Oh no, honey, such a successful businesswoman, a real role model. By the way, Richard is running a campaign for a second term, and we're having a reception for potential donors. It would be wonderful to have you among our guests." I sighed. "Thank you for the invitation, Mrs. Fitzgerald, but I'm not interested in politics and I don't sponsor election campaigns." "But dear, this is a great opportunity to make some useful acquaintances. You've lived so modestly for so many years. It's time to come out." "I'm comfortable where I am," I replied firmly. "Have a nice day." Over the next hour, I received 4 more calls like that. Suddenly, the cream of Martinsburg society was aware of my existence. People who had previously barely given me a nod at a casual meeting were now hungry for my company, my friendship, and, of course, my money. I turned off the phone and walked over to the bookcase where the family albums were kept. I pulled out the oldest one with a worn leather binding. On the first page was a picture of a very young Hugh and me at the entrance to our first store. Me, in a simple dress, him in a shirt with the sleeves rolled up. both of us smiling as wide as if we had just won the grand prize in the lottery of life. In a way, we had. We had won the chance to build something with our own hands, to create a future of our own design. That little store on Maple Street wasn't just commercial real estate. It was the embodiment of our dreams, our vision, our faith in each other. I flipped through the pages of the scrapbook, watching us, our business, our lives change. Here's Hugh at his desk, creating his first piece of jewelry. Here I am with a pile of papers, planning our first advertising campaign. Here we are opening a second store, then a third. Here's Bridget, a tiny bundle in my arms. Here she is taking her first steps, holding on to Hugh's finger. Here we are all together on a picnic, happy and carefree. When our business started to make a serious profit, Hugh and I talked a lot about how to move on. Many people in our position would have bought a mansion, luxury cars, started collecting art or yachts. Why do we need all that? Hugh asked. Would we be happier in a house with 20 rooms than in our cozy little nest? We decided that we would invest in business development, in charity, and in our daughter's future. But in doing so, we would continue to live simply, without drawing attention or losing touch with reality. I've seen how money changes people, Clarice, Hugh once said. Once they start to surround themselves with luxuries, they stop seeing the world as it is. They create a golden cage around them and think it's freedom. I closed the album and went back to the window. In the years after Hugh's death, I hadn't changed our arrangement. I still lived in the same house, drove the same car, wore modest though quality clothes. Not out of stinginess, as Bridget thought, but out of fidelity to the principles that Hugh and I considered important. Of course, we could have explained this to our daughter more clearly. Maybe if we had talked to her more about our values, about why we made the choices we did, she would have understood. But on the other hand, weren't there few examples before her eyes? Hadn't she seen how we lived, how we worked, how we treated money and success? The next morning began with a visit from my attorney, Daniel Harrison. I called him as soon as I returned from the wedding, and he, realizing the urgency of the situation, arrived as early as he could. Clarice, I have to ask you one more time, he said, spreading out the papers on the table. Are you sure you're sure about this? Changing a will is a big step, especially when you're dealing with such a substantial estate. I'm absolutely sure, Daniel, I replied. What happened at the wedding yesterday was just the catalyst. I've been thinking about it for a long time. He nodded. Good. In that case, we'll set up a charitable trust like you wanted and transfer the bulk of your assets to it. Winslow Jewelry as a company will continue to operate under the management of the board of directors, but the income will go to the foundation. Bridget would own only the premises of the first store on Maple Street and a small amount of money enough to start her own business if she wanted to. Exactly, I confirmed, and I want the foundation to focus on helping orphans, creating opportunities for them to get an education, to find their vocation, to build a decent life. Have you come up with a name for the foundation? I thought for a moment. The Hugh and Clarice Winslow Foundation. Simple and to the point. Daniel smiled. He'd like that. Yes, I nodded. Hugh had always believed that real wealth was the ability to help others. We spent several hours discussing the details, the structure of the fund, tax aspects, and legal formalities. When all the documents were signed, Daniel gathered them into a folder and asked, "Have you already decided who will manage the fund? It has to be someone you trust completely. I have several candidates, but I want to talk to them personally first. It's a big responsibility." After the lawyer left, I was left alone again with my thoughts. The decision had been made. The papers had been signed. Now the next step was to find the right people to run the fund and develop specific programs to help. I thought of the St. Agnes orphanage where I had spent my childhood. I wondered if it still existed. And if so, in what condition? With these thoughts in mind, I turned on my computer and began my search. To my surprise, the orphanage not only existed, but also had its own website. However, judging by the photos, the building was in a deplorable condition. Peeling paint, old furniture, worn-out equipment. Everything looked almost the same as it did 60 years ago when I lived there. The website listed the phone number of the director, one Mrs. Beatrice Hope. I dialed the number, not really hoping for an answer. It was a Saturday afternoon, and it was morning. St. Agnes Children's Home, this is Principal Hope, came the energetic female voice. Hello, I said. My name is Clarice Winslow. I'm a former resident of your facility, and I'd like to discuss the possibility of helping you. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Clarice Winslow? Mrs. Hope asked. The Clarice Winslow from Winslow Javelry? Yes, that's me, I confirmed, a little surprised that she knew me. Oh my God, she exclaimed. You have no idea what an honor this is. We keep newspaper clippings about you, show our children as an example of what can be achieved despite a difficult beginning. You are a legend to us. I didn't expect such a reaction. The thought that my story could inspire children in the same situation I was in once filled me with warmth. Thank you for saying that, I said sincerely. But that's not why I'm calling. I'm starting a charity to help orphans, and I'd like to discuss how we can work together. Oh, she sounded genuinely excited. That's wonderful. When would it be convenient for you to meet? If possible, I'd like to come over today. To see what the house looks like now, to meet the children and staff, to hear about your needs and plans. Of course, of course. We look forward to seeing you at any convenient time. We made an appointment to meet in 2 hours. As I hung up the phone, I felt a surge of energy, for the first time in days. Yes, the decision to change my will had been driven by frustration and pain. But now that I was taking action, I knew it was the right thing to do. Not just to strip Bridget of her undeserved wealth, but to channel those funds into real help for those in need. St. Agnes Children's Home was located in the old part of town, 2 blocks from Maple Street, where our first store had once stood. As I pulled up to the familiar 3-story red brick building, I felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and anxiety. This was where my childhood had been, not the happiest, but it had shaped me as a person. Mrs. Hope met me at the entrance, an energetic woman in her 50s with a short haircut and intelligent eyes. She shook my hand firmly. Mrs. Winslow, I can't tell you how happy I am to see you. Welcome home. Home. It was strange to hear that word for a place I had longed to escape from in my youth. Inside, the house looked cleaner and brighter than I remembered, but the basic problems were the same. Dilapidated walls, old furniture, shabby books on the shelves. In the playroom, children of different ages were doing their own thing. Some were drawing, some were playing board games, some were reading. They raised their heads, looking curiously at the unfamiliar visitor. Children, Mrs. Hope addressed them. This is Mrs. Winslow. She used to live here like you. Now she owns a large jewelry company and helps children without parents. I could see the disbelief in their eyes. The same disbelief I had felt when adults told us success stories of former foster children. It seemed like a fairy tale, something unattainable. Hello, I said simply. It's nice to meet you. A little girl about 7 years old raised her hand. Do you really make jewelry? I smiled. I used to. My husband was a real craftsman, and now we have many talented jewelers who create beautiful things. Do you have anything with you? Another girl, an older girl, asked. I showed my pearl necklace and brooch. My husband made this jewelry many years ago. The children came closer, looking at the pearls and diamonds with genuine interest. After introducing the children, Mrs. Hope led me around the building. We toured the bedrooms, the classrooms, the dining room, and the medical room. Everywhere there were signs of time and underfunding. Leaky ceilings, old plumbing, worn linens. The state provides minimal funds, Mrs. Hope explained. We survive mostly on donations, but they are never enough for everything. We have to choose between fixing the roof or buying new textbooks. In her office, we sat down at a small round table and Mrs. Hope offered me tea. I told her about my decision to create a foundation and my desire to make the orphanage one of its first projects. I don't just want to renovate the building, I explained. I want to create a system that will support the children after they leave these walls. College scholarships, internships at companies, a mentoring program. Mrs. Hope's eyes lit up. This is exactly what I've been dreaming of. You know, the hardest thing for me is seeing our kids go nowhere. At 18, they're released into adulthood with no money, no support, no real skills. No wonder so many end up on the streets or get involved with bad companies. We spent several hours discussing possible programs, the needs of the children, and the structure of the interaction between the foundation and the orphanage. Mrs. Hope turned out to be not just an enthusiast, but a competent organizer with a clear vision of what needs to be done. "Do you know what is the most important thing for these children?" she asked as we were finishing up our meeting. "Not money, not nice clothes, not even a good education. It's believing in themselves. Belief that they can build a decent life despite a difficult beginning. And your story is the best proof of that." I nodded, feeling the tears coming to my eyes. "I know. A long time ago, one of my teachers, Mrs. Tanner, told me that I was special, that I had a gift for seeing beauty in the simplest things. It was so important to know that someone believed in you. So now it's your turn to be Mrs. Tanner for a new generation." Beatrice Hope smiled. As I left the orphanage, I looked back at the old red brick building. Strange how life makes a circle. I started here as an unwanted girl who lost her parents. And now I'm coming back here as a person who can change the fates of other children in the same situation. In the car, I pulled out my phone and turned it on for the first time all day. 25 missed calls. Most were from numbers I didn't recognize, the same well-wishers who'd called yesterday. 3 calls from Bridget. Not one voicemail. I didn't bother calling back. Not now. First, I had to finish what I'd started. Set up the foundation, develop outreach programs, find the right people to implement them. Bridget would have to wait. Maybe the time apart would help her rethink her values and priorities. Or maybe it won't. Either way, my decision has been made. Spring in Martinsburg has always been my favorite time of year. The chestnut trees along the main street were covered with soft pink flowers. The air was filled with freshness, and people seemed to awaken from their winter hibernation, welcoming the warm, sunny days with smiles. 4 months had passed since that memorable day at Bridget's wedding. 4 months that had completely changed my life. Whereas before my days were filled with a quiet routine, occasional meetings with the company managers, and lonely evenings in an empty house, now every hour was scheduled, every day brought new tasks and challenges. The Hugh and Clarice Winslow Foundation was officially registered in January. By February, we had already launched our first program, a complete renovation of St. Agnes Children's Home. By March, we had completed the roof repairs, replaced all the plumbing, updated the electrical wiring, and installed a new heating system. Now we were working on equipping modern classrooms and a computer lab. But the most important project for me was the mentoring program for disadvantaged girls. Mrs. Hope and I selected 10 girls from the orphanage between the ages of 14 and 17 who were smart, talented, but had no prospects after graduation. I set up a special workshop for them in a building across the street from the orphanage, where the best Winslow jewelers taught them the basics of the trade. Today was a special day, the first workshop that I conducted in person. Once upon a time, Hugh taught me how to make simple silver pendants with semi-precious stones. I was not as talented a craftsman as he was, but I had retained the basic skills, and now I wanted to pass them on to the girls. The workshop greeted me with a buzz of voices and an atmosphere of anticipation. 10 pairs of eyes followed my every move as I laid out my tools and materials on a large table in the middle of the room. "Good afternoon, girls," I began. "Today, we will be making silver pendants with amethysts. It's a fairly simple job, but it requires attention and patience." Leah, the youngest of the group, timidly raised her hand. "Mrs. Winslow, can we really make a real piece of jewelry ourselves?" "Of course," I smiled. "My husband always said that creating beauty requires not so much skill as love and attention to detail. Everything else comes with practice." I showed them how to work the silver plate, how to set the stones, how to give the metal the desired shape. The girls watched every move with such attention that there was almost complete silence in the workshop, broken only by the clinking of tools. As I watched them work, I saw myself in them. The same uncertain but hopeful girl from the orphanage who had once been given a chance to create something with her own hands. For me, that chance was meeting Hugh. For them, this program. By the end of the 3-hour class, each of the girls had created her own pendant, some crooked, some with stones not perfectly set, but all unique and filled with sincere effort. "Well done," I said, looking at the results. "This is just the beginning. There are many more classes ahead, many new techniques and materials. But remember the main thing. Every piece of jewelry created with love will find its owner." "Do you think we will ever be able to work in a real jewelry workshop?" asked Tess, one of the older girls. Not only will you be able to work in a real jewelry shop, but you will, I answered confidently. Those of you who show real interest and talent will get scholarships to a design college and then an internship at Winslow Jewelry. And if you want to start your own business, the foundation will help you with startup capital. Their faces lit up with hope, the same feeling that is missing in children who have grown up without family and support. After the class, I stayed late to talk to Mrs. Hope about expanding the program to other Martinsburg orphanages. We were sitting in her small office, drinking tea and making plans when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but my gut told me it was important. Hello? Mrs. Winslow? It was a man's voice. This is Peter Montgomery, your daughter's attorney, Bridget Huntington. She asked me to contact you about a meeting. Lawyer? I asked her again. Can't we speak directly? Mrs. Huntington felt that having a lawyer present would be beneficial to both parties, given the delicacy of the situation, he replied diplomatically. We're talking about the Maple Street store and other aspects of the inheritance. I sighed. It was typical Bridget, using third parties to cover herself when a complicated issue needed to be resolved. Okay, Mr. Montgomery, when and where would Bridget like to meet? Tomorrow at 2 o'clock in my office on Oak Avenue, if that's convenient. I'm comfortable, I replied. I'll see you then. As I hung up the phone, I met Mrs. Hope's questioning gaze. Is there a problem? She asked. I'm not sure, I answered honestly. My daughter wants to meet to discuss the inheritance. She's brought in a lawyer to discuss it. Is she still hoping to get more than you plan to leave? I nodded. Apparently so, although I don't understand why now. She called a few times after the wedding, but I wasn't ready to talk. And then the calls stopped, and now she's a lawyer. Maybe something has changed in her life, Mrs. Hope suggested. People sometimes reevaluate their priorities after a major upheaval. Or they look for new ways to get what they think is rightfully theirs, I added bitterly. Well, we'll find out tomorrow. Attorney Montgomery's office was in a modern glass and concrete building in the downtown area. The sterile reception area, with its leather couches and minimalist decor, was boring and impersonal like most places. Bridget was already waiting for me, sitting on the couch with a perfectly straight back and her hands folded in her lap. She looked different, not as dapper and frumpy as she'd been at the wedding, more tired, more real. Her hair was in a simple bun, her makeup minimal, her clothes elegant but not flashy. Hello, Mom, she said, coming up to meet me. Hello, Bridget, I said, not making an attempt to hug her. It's been a long time. 4 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days, she said with unexpected precision. But who's counting? We exchanged strained smiles. At that moment, Peter Montgomery emerged from the inner office, a lean, middle-aged man with attentive eyes and an inviting smile. Mrs. Winslow, he shook my hand. Thank you for seeing me. Please come into my office. We were seated at an oval conference table. Montgomery sat across from Bridget and me, pulled out a folder of documents, and coughed. So, Mrs. Winslow, your daughter has asked me for advice about her inheritance rights. Specifically, she's interested in the Maple Street store you plan to leave her. That's right, I nodded. That store is the only part of Winslow Jewelry that will go to Bridget. The rest of the assets will go to a charitable foundation. Yes, I've read a copy of your will. Montgomery flipped a few pages in his folder. And I'd like to be clear. This store is to be owned by Mrs. Huntington, with the right to dispose of it as she sees fit? Absolutely, I confirmed. Bridget could sell it, rent it out, or use it for her own business. It would be hers without conditions. That's fine, the lawyer nodded. In that case, Mrs. Huntington would like to discuss the possibility of transferring the property to her now, rather than through inheritance. I looked at Bridget. She was sitting with her eyes downcast, rubbing the bracelet on her wrist. Why? I asked bluntly. Montgomery started to answer, but Bridget interrupted him. I'll explain, Mother. She finally raised her eyes and looked at me. I'm divorcing Ezra. The news didn't come as a big surprise to me. Marriages based on mutual benefit rather than love rarely last. I'm sorry, I said neutrally. But what did this have to do with the store? Bridget took a deep breath. After your statement at the wedding, everything changed. Ezra was furious. He kept accusing me of hiding your fortune from him, calling me a liar, demanding that I convince you to change your will back. She was silent for a moment, gathering her thoughts. When it became clear that you weren't going to do it, he began to looking for compensation in other ways, spending money without counting, buying a yacht, throwing parties for his friends, ignoring me completely. And 2 months ago, I found out he was cheating on me. With Victoria Page, can you believe it? The same one who made fun of my engagement dress. I didn't say anything, so I let her talk. Anyway, I filed for divorce, Bridget continued. But under the prenup, I'll get almost nothing. Ezra keeps all the assets he acquired during the marriage, and my own savings are barely enough for a couple months' rent. Now I see why we're having this conversation. And you want to get the store so you can sell it and use the money to make a new life for yourself. I finished for her. Bridget nodded. Yes, it's the only asset I can consider mine, and I need it now, not later. I noticed she was avoiding the word after you're dead. Typical Bridget, avoiding unpleasant topics. You know what's ironic, Bridget? I asked calmly. If you just call me and tell me your situation, I'd help you with money. No lawyers, no official paperwork, just as the mother of a daughter. But you chose to go through a representative like we were strangers. I wasn't sure you'd want to talk to me, she countered. After the wedding, you didn't return my calls. Because I needed time to deal with the pain of your betrayal, I replied. But that doesn't mean I stopped being your mother. There was a heavy silence in the office. Montgomery was tactfully tucked away in his papers, giving us a chance to talk. Mom, Bridget finally said, and there was a sincerity in her voice that I hadn't heard in a long time. I know what I did at the wedding was awful, and I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm just asking for help. It's not about forgiveness, Bridget, I sighed. It's about understanding. Do you realize why I did what I did with the will? She paused, as if really thinking about the question. Because I was ashamed of you, she said quietly at last. Ashamed of our past, of our beginnings. I wanted to appear to be something I wasn't. She looked up at me. I was a fool, Mother, and I paid for it in full. I looked at my daughter carefully, trying to see how sincere her words were. Was it genuine remorse or another attempt at manipulation? What do you plan to do next, Bridget? I asked. If I hand over the store to you, how will you handle the money? Yeah, I don't know, she admitted. At first I thought I'd just sell it and live on the money until I got a job. But now… She paused, as if thinking about something. Now I'm not sure. Maybe I should try to do something with this store. Revitalize it like you and Dad used to. I couldn't hold back a surprised look. It was something new. Bridget thinking about making something with her hands, not just consuming it. What would you like to do there? I asked with genuine curiosity. I don't know. Maybe a vintage jewelry store? She shrugged. I've always had good taste and I know the trends, or a handmade accessories boutique. I could find talented artisans and give them a platform to sell. I watched her carefully, trying to figure out if these were real plans or just words to impress me. Mr. Montgomery, I turned to the lawyer. Would you mind leaving us alone for a few minutes? Of course. He rose and left the office. When we were alone, I looked at Bridget. Tell me the truth. Do you really want to start your own business, or are you just saying what you think I want to hear? She hesitated, and I could see the inner struggle on her face. Honestly, I don't know, she finally said. Part of me really wants to create something of my own, to prove to myself that I can. But the other part of me is afraid of failure and would rather just sell the store and forget the whole thing. Her honesty surprised me and gave me hope at the same time. Maybe her painful experience with Ezra really made her rethink her values. You know what your father told me when we first opened that store? I asked, smiling at the memory. Clarice, this isn't just a room with a storefront. This is the beginning of our story. The place where we're going to prove to the world and ourselves what we're capable of. I pulled a small velvet box out of my purse. I brought this today because deep down, I hoped our meeting would be about more than just money. I opened the box and showed Bridget an antique key on a silver chain. It was the key to our first store, the original one Hugh and I used to open the doors on our first day of business. I want you to have it. Not as a memento, but as a symbol that each of us, at any time in our lives, can open a new door and start anew. Bridget took the key gingerly, her fingers trembling. Are you really giving me a chance after all I've done? I'm giving you a chance to give yourself a chance, I replied. It's up to you to decide what you want to do with it. You can sell the store and forget about it. You can try to create something of your own. Either way, it will be your choice and your responsibility. I took out a folder of documents from my bag. Here are the transfer papers. I'll sign them right now. The store will be yours. No strings attached, no strings attached. Bridget's eyes filled with tears. Mom, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. I shook my head. Show me. With deeds, with decisions, with how you'll handle this opportunity. I signed the papers and returned them to the folder. Tell Mr. Montgomery it's all settled. He can execute the transfer of ownership. What about you? You're not staying? Bridget asked. No, I gotta go. I have a class with the girls in the mentoring program in an hour. She nodded, still clutching the key in her hand. This program, does it mean a lot to you? More than I could have imagined, I answered sincerely. You know, Bridget, real wealth isn't about money in an account or the number of diamonds. It's the ability to make a difference in someone's life, to give hope where there was none. I stood up and headed for the door. Bridget called out to me, Mom, thank you, and not just for the store, for the lesson. I turned around. What lesson? That real value is not in having, but in creating, and that it's never too late to start over. I smiled. It's a lesson that life has taught me, and one that your father repeated every day. I hope you've learned it now, too. I went outside where the spring wind played with the petals of the blossoming chestnuts. Ahead of me was a workshop full of young girls just starting out. Bridget stayed behind, with the key to her future in her hands and a decision to make. What would she choose? I didn't know, but for the first time in a long time, I felt not bitterness at the thought of my daughter, but hope. Hope that one day she would realize what Hugh and I had always known. That true wealth is not measured in money, but in what you create with your hands, your heart, and your labor. And that even the humblest of beginnings can lead to great things if you are true to your values and are not afraid to start from scratch.